ocean's whisper calls my name. Depth and longing in my soul, seeking more than just this game. Waves crash softly at my feet, echoes in my heart so deep. Eyes on horizon far and true, longing for a love so steep. Deep calls to deep inside of me, where the sky meets endless sea. Heartbeats blend with ocean's roar, seeking depth I can't ignore. Echoes in my heart so deep, eyes on horizon far and true, longing for a love so steep. Deep calls to deep inside of me, where the sky meets endless sea. Heartbeats blend with ocean's roar, seeking depth I can't ignore. Shells and sand beneath my toes, tides reveal what ebb and flows. In the quiet still I hear whisper longings crystal clear. Deep calls to deep inside of me, where the sky meets endless sea. Heartbeats blend with ocean's roar, seeking depth I can't ignore. Desire, burning with a holy fire. Depth of love beyond all dreams, in the vastness it redeems. Deep calls to deep inside of me, where the sky meets endless sea. Heartbeats blend with ocean's roar, seeking depth I can't ignore.
Ah, dang, I keep forgetting that I mean to go back and edit that to take out so much of that big annoying beeping at the end because it's really loud and really long, and I keep forgetting. I don't know. I need you to text me later and remind me. That's your job there, Roddy, is to remind me when I'm not busy next week. So anyway, sorry. My ADHD brain is really off the rails today. So this could be really interesting to see how we do with my focus ability a little lower than normal. So, but anyway, sorry, off the track about we're not here about my ADHD. We're here to talk about my friend Phil and his book. Oh, I meant to put in the new. Oh, wait, well, so there we go. We got the temple behind us that works with sacrifices. I guess we'll leave it behind. It was from yesterday's video that I did with a friend. But we're going to talk about your new book. And I am really excited about this Leviticus on the Butcher's Block. And so, first of all, Phil, let's just start with anybody who is new to the channel or hasn't been here for one of our yet to be determined number of series of Why Leviticus Matters videos that we've been working our way through that have been, I've learned so much from and I've had a ton of fun doing. But so people who don't know who you are, why don't you talk a little bit about, just kind of tell us, Phil, about yourself and then how you ended up started writing this book in the first place.
Yeah, thanks. So yeah, I'm Phil Bray. I'm a qualified butcher. I live in Sydney, Australia. I have been studying Leviticus for many years, maybe 7 or 8 years by now, and atonement, kind of by accident. Someone made a passing comment about atonement one day when we were in a small group, Bible study group. And I tried to find that comment about atonement in the Bible and couldn't find it. that led down a deep rabbit hole that led to Leviticus. And for some reason, Leviticus clicked. It could be my analytical brain or something. But it made sense of a lot of the questions that I'd been asking. And then I'd been taking notes about as I was listening to lectures and books and stuff, and I had like 20,000 words of notes. I'm like, oh, maybe I should write a book. And so started writing a book. And then I realized, hang on, I've got some insight into the sacrificial world that probably not many people would have being a butcher. And so that became the concept, the angle for the book.
Yeah, that was the part that really caught my attention when you were talking about, like, well, yeah, I'm a butcher, so you start off with that right in Leviticus 1. It's like, bam, there it is. I mean, they lead with that right there at the beginning, because you're talking about that's the burnt offering, and then the one that's completely consumed by fire. So there's, so like they don't even, Leviticus doesn't even make you wait for that. They just lead with lead with butchering right from chapter 1. So that really was interesting to me. So from your perspective as a butcher, we'll get into more of the book and the stuff you're talking about in the book, but I'm just kind of curious as what you've learned in the process of becoming a butcher and learning how to do that. Like some of the quirky things that kind of caught your attention, that you see in overlaps in Leviticus.
Yeah. So there were some surprising things. One of the surprising things was kidneys and livers. And people talk about kidneys being in the center and the liver being heavy. And that to me was just an obvious thing, but I guess to everyone else it wouldn't be. Because you think about where kidneys are in our body, they're not really in the middle, but when you have a body of lamb sitting on your bench, it is literally in the middle, in a big cavity on the inside. And so I was reading a book where kidneys are described as in the center of the animal and being likened to the core emotions that sit in the center of a person or a being. And I was like, yeah, they are in the middle. I know this because I've pulled out a lot of kidneys from lambs. But the other thing is I started looking more closely. I think I hadn't really thought about it, but I'd kind of assumed that the whole animal was put on the altar, because a lot of the pictures you see, that's how it's illustrated. But then you think about how heavy a bull is, or trying to get a live animal onto the flames, and you think, no, that would just be cruel and impossible. And then you start noticing all the instructions about how to divide up the animal, which, like, the priests get the right thigh specifically, and the breast is often separated, and it's a wave offering. So once I started noticing all those little things, I'm like, this I've got a lot that I can kind of speak to, coming from a butcher's experience.
And that kind of, and when I first started talking, and you were, and about this and your experience of butchering, and in our Leviticus series, it kind of struck me amusing. Like, does that put a whole new nuance on the process of training to learn to be a priest? Like, we don't think about, when you're thinking about preparing to be a priest in the Old Testament, that you have to take at least one training session on how to break down and butcher an animal. Like, that's normally not what you think about when we think about the duties of a priest. Well, it's in there, but you don't think like, oh, I'm going to go study theology and learn how to, all these things and their significance, but I also got to go learn how to carve up a carcass. That just, to me, that just seems odd.
Yes. And they would have had to be quite strong as well, to kind of haul all the pieces of meat onto the altar. But yeah, the killing itself wasn't normally done by the priest. So their responsibility was to portion up the animal. And they would have been doing it a lot. So yeah, they were basically butchers.
Yeah.
And is it Ezekiel that talks about the kitchens?
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
That's Ezekiel because
So
it's a transfers over into the new temple. Yeah.
yeah, so it's such a big part that
Hmm.
they talk about kitchens and meat hooks and knives, um, like actual rooms dedicated to the preparation of the meat. So yeah, it was a major job of a priest.
Yeah, because if you've got people who are bringing other, because there's, if you think about it, there's a lot of sacrifices that are coming to the temple because you've got the 7 big feast days and festivals that last, some of them a week, and those all have a lot of offerings associated with the festivals. And then you've got all the other things that you bring, offerings and things too. So you've got, women who need to come back in after childbirth and all the atoning sacrifices. Like, that's a lot of, priests spend a lot of time, butchering. It's kind of like, maybe we think about just kind of nuances, priestly duties for me in a, because normally you're thinking about the guys holding up the smoke and splashing, and the high priest going into the Holy of Holies. You don't think about the amount of time these guys are going to spend breaking down, butchering animals. That thought just kind of intrigues me a little bit. A little bit.
Yep, yep, yep. Yeah, the other stuff that they do is, I guess, yeah, the time that it would take, while it's important, probably didn't take as much time as breaking up bodies of beef and bodies of lamb. Yep.
Well, yeah, and the fact that they have to haul those, those carcasses around. And because I remember when I was growing up, my grandfather was a dairy research scientist, and so we spent a lot of time out on his research dairy when we were really little. And there was a few times we were there that they would lose a cow, or they had to, they slaughtered a bull, and they had a serious, like, there's a forklift to
Mm.
haul these things around because these cows are not small at all. And so the fact that you've got these priests are, slaughtered bulls, they can't walk over to the, like, to the butchering table, and can't dissected walk over to the altar. I mean, that's a lot of pounds of meat to haul
Mhm.
around every time I just, sorry,
Yep.
the scope of that is just starting to finally catch up to
Yeah,
my
they could weigh as
brain.
much as a car, a bull. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yep.
that's kind of crazy. Anyway, we're getting sidetracked on little stuff. See, I tell you,
Yep.
ADHD brain. This is where it goes. So yeah, oh yeah, I want to get back into your book here. So you mentioned you'd put a lot of time studying in Leviticus and all the notes and everything, and just, hey, let's turn it into a book. But talk a little bit and walk through, like, your process. How did you do that? Like, what was involved with actually getting all that organized and sitting down and writing it, and just the process of, because that's your first book, so that's a massive accomplishment.
Yeah. So when I was in school, I wanted to be a writer or a journalist. Um, but it never happened because I became a butcher instead. Being a butcher was like my ticket out of school. It was basically stay at school, go to university, keep studying, or you can leave school, but only if you get a job. So I left school. I got a job as a butcher. But writing was still, I guess, my passion, what I wanted to do, but it didn't happen for a very long time. Um, so yeah, I hadn't written before, apart from the odd article here and there. But I guess it kind of started in COVID when I had time to sit, and I wrote, not the butcher book, but I wrote something that was too big and too messy and too vague. And then once I hit on the butcher idea, I kind of took all that information that I had, and put it into in sacrifice, basically from the perspective of a butcher, which became the book. But yeah, I guess I'd always liked writing, and I guess, it's been kind of validating that I really, really enjoy it. Like, it's what I do like to do now in my spare time. But people have told me that they like the book, so I might be good at it as well. So it's been a
Well,
validating experience.
I'm waiting for the novellas or the novels about the colonies of sentient toadstools. I'm waiting for that because I was like, "Oh, I love this. This is going to be that's going to be fun." That's out of his introduction there in his
Yep.
book. Little things that catch my attention when when I'm reading.
Yep. Well, that
I
was
get the
my
important
dream,
things.
to be a fantasy writer. Yep.
I'm waiting for it, Phil.
To
I'm
write
waiting
about
for it.
goblins and elves and yep.
That's awesome. So let's take Deborah had a question really quick that was I think a really good one. Then we'll kind of dive into the heart of the book there. But Deborah wants to know. Okay, I have a question. Is each cut of meat significant in the little bit laws, like each part of the animal? So I'm guessing she's asking if like the way that they break the animal down, the significance of those different sections or parts of the carcass that are broken down for sacrifice.
Yeah. So great question. But it's not as specific as we might think today. So I visited Ethiopia a few years ago and saw the way that they broke up meat, and that there was kind of no precise way that they did it. They kind of just went at it and got the meat off as best they could. Um, and I imagine Ethiopia is very, very similar to the culture that you read about in the Old Testament. They still have ox treading out the grain, and they still throw the chaff up into the wind, and the wind separates the chaff from the wheat. Like, it's actually amazing. You feel like you're stepping back a couple of thousand years. All that to say, they talk about the right thigh and the breast specifically. So the breast is often presented as a wave offering before the Lord, and the right thigh is often given to the priests and their families to eat. But apart from that, there's nothing specific. So it says that the legs are washed, and I imagine that's because it's walking around and they would tread in poop and they would get dirty. The skin is included in the burnt offering, but other offerings it's burnt outside the camp in a clean place. So yeah, but apart from that, on the head is specifically placed on the altar, and the kidneys and the liver. But yeah, the specific cuts of meat aren't really talked about. Yeah, apart from the thigh and the breast and the internal bits.
And I had just as a follow up to that, because something that you and I had I asked you a question when we were doing the Leviticus prep a couple of episodes ago that you hadn't considered at that point. So I'm wondering now, following up, to see if you'd considered it some more. Because I'd asked you about the significance of the internal organs and the way that they're placed in the animals, so they're like more central. Because in the Hebrew mind and the way that works, that those are the parts that not just the seat of emotion, but what they would consider like the seat and the essence of your person. So like the imagery, if you would think about like, is that really part of when those pieces are offered, you're offering your essence of your person when you're offering those specific, like the internal organs in the offering process?
Yeah, I wouldn't want to say that is what it meant, but I do think that that concept would have been floating around. Like, the ideas would have been there. So today, if we talk about our heart, like a broken heart, or I love you with all of my heart, if we were to place a heart on an altar or on a dinner plate or something, we might just have that association with what a heart means for us there. For an ancient Hebrew, the kidneys and the liver were talked about as their deepest inner emotions. So the liver represents heavy emotions, and the kidney represents like the deepest central emotions of a person. So yeah, I wouldn't want to say that that's what it means when they're placed on the altar and given to God, but I do think that it's worth thinking about that. Yeah, that association probably would have been there.
I would think there'd be at least a little bit of like symbolism that would be for contemplation there. Not that that's the one-to-one requirement that that's what it has to mean, but
and it's interesting that God gets those. The humans or the Hebrews didn't eat the kidney and the liver. And so, I wonder, in the book, whether that is saying that I'm presenting to God a symbol of what I want my deepest inner emotions to be. Like I'm sharing my deepest inner emotions with God around the dinner table, basically.
Right, which I think was what prompted the question to you in the first place when I got to that part in the book. And I was like, hey, I wonder if you thought about that, because that's kind of interesting. That's the whole, that's a lot of what the Shema does, is it talks about engaging all of those parts in contemplating and meditating on Yahweh. And so I just, I can't help it. My brain just hyperlink and intertextual hops all over the place like that. So that's just kind of how I'm wired. So
that was one of the things that surprised me, and I think has changed me as a person, because I'm quite an analytical person. Like, ask my wife. I'm analytical to a fault. But studying Leviticus has actually shown me that the experience and the senses would have been super important, and that what they smelt and what they tasted and what they saw would have probably had more meaning than any words that were communicated or any words that were said, especially if they're doing it regularly, or they're seeing a constant column of smoke rising up to the heavens. Like, that would have viscerally symbolized to them that that they're connected to Yahweh through that altar and the smoke. And it's something that in my church especially, we focus on the sermon, and it's often a very cognitive university lecture style address from the front, from a pulpit, where everyone sits and just listens to kind of academic words. But your brain's probably the same, but my family's brain, they don't learn that way. Like, they learn from experiencing things. They would learn more from tastes and smells than they would having to sit through a 20, 30-minute sermon. So I think God knows that. And God knew that when he told the Israelites how he wanted them to meet with him. And it was through sacrifice, through a meal, and through all of the stuff, like the smoke and the smells and the tastes.
See, I'm actually more of what's kind of called the Gestalt thinker. So I start with the big, incorporating the right-brained experiential whole imagery thing, and then work backwards. So I kind of go backwards from the way that most scholars work, which is fine, because I always end up mostly in the same place anyway. I just get there a little differently than everybody else. So and Deborah wants to know if the book is on audio. Do you have an audio version of that?
That is next on my to-do list. I've emailed the publisher, Whitfenstock, and they said yes. And then they basically said, you do it and we'll make it happen. So I've got to book a room. I've got to, there's a new library that's open just near us, and it has podcast recording studios in the library, which is very exciting. So I'm thinking I'm going to book that out. Sit down for a couple of hours and get an audiobook happening. Yeah.
That'll be awesome. Yeah, because right now I have it connected to Speechify, so then I can listen to it that way. So that's also a way to do that, Deborah. If you have Speechify, it connects to your Kindle, and if you have the Kindle version, you can do it that way. Or that's how I listen to it. But
that's actually what I did. So a little insight into how I wrote it. I would write it down, and then as I'm driving along, I'd play it back to myself using Speechify, and I'd pick up on anything that didn't feel quite right, or repeated words, or bad grammar, whatever. Yeah, Speechify is great.
Yeah, there's nothing like hearing things out loud. I think it comes in a different pathway than when you read it, than when you hear it. So sometimes that's why I like that kind of thing, because then it highlights the words as you go along, so you get both at the same time, which to me is great. So anyway, back to back to the book and not Speechify. See, it's ADHD brain again. Uh, so, yeah. So you started kind of the same place that Leviticus did. Just jumped right into the burnt offerings. But before we do that, I do wanted to, because I don't remember because I'm scrolling. My brain is scrolling all over the place. One of the things I did notice is that you use the word offering pretty much all the time instead of the word sacrifice. So talk about that choice, because I just filmed an episode that's going to drop in a couple of weeks with a friend of ours yesterday, and we talked about that replacement of you stepping away from the word sacrifice and using the word offering. And I noticed in your book you use the word offering pretty much exclusively. So talk about that a little bit.
Yeah. Yeah, that was intentional. So good noticing. And it could just be me, but I think other people feel the same, that sacrifice today has a different meaning. So sacrifice today means giving something up or going without, like depriving yourself of something. So giving something up because you want something better, or giving something up for the greater good. Like we talk about, I sacrificed my my day off for the kids or something, or I don't know, I sacrificed whatever for something else. But the biblical meaning, or not even biblical, the ancient meaning of a sacrifice wasn't about going without. It was more about sharing a good thing with a God. And yeah, you were hoping that you would get something out of it, but the focus wasn't on what you were giving up. The focus was on the relationship that you were hoping to achieve with the God. So even outside of the Bible, if you read like Homer's The Iliad, they offer so many sacrifices, but it's always within the context of giving food to a god, trying to please the god so that they'll win a war, or they've just won a war and they come back and they offer like the fatty portions to the god, and they hope that the god will bless them and look after them. And most of the time the gods aren't interested, but they try their best. So I was specific in using the word offering because I think it's easier for us to jump to the idea of offering a gift to God rather than a negative aspect of giving something up because God requires it.
Right. And I think too, there's also, when you think about some of what we've, now the aspect you talked about like I lose so someone else can gain, as an idea of sacrificing something. But there's also some aspects of cultures that have had engaged in like human sacrifice and sacrifice of infants, and there's this pagan magic obligatory sense to the word sacrifice, that you're in some way trying to obligate the whatever deity you're trying to bring into under your control or your obligation in some point, which is not possible with Yahweh. So that that always kind of I'm the same way. I've switched to the word offerings all the time anyway now, because it's stepping away from that connotation.
Yeah, one of the things that stood out to me was that it's not a transaction, because often we see, or we think about a sacrifice as a transaction, like I give you something, I get something back. But one of the things I learned was that it's more giving a gift within an existing relationship. So God had already rescued his people. He'd already made a covenant relationship with them. Mm-hmm. So all the offerings and sacrifices are presented within that existing relationship. Like the relationship didn't rely on the sacrifice. So yeah, that was important.
Right. Yep. We could go on about that all day and the whole where that goes. But I do want to jump in, because you do start the same place Leviticus does with the burnt offering. So if you could kind of just walk us through, let's talk about the burnt offerings. Like what were the function of the burnt offerings? How did those how did those work, and just kind of the way you walk through. I mean, it was really brilliantly done, and it's really amusing too. It's a fun book to read, and your stories are fun, and it's engaging, and the examples you use, especially with ones of your kids, like the one with your son and cake, that one just sticks in my head. It probably will stick in my head forever.
Hmm.
But it's a brilliant way to explain that. So kind of talk about the burnt aspects of the burnt offerings.
Yeah. So, um, burnt offering, um, the word is olah, um, and it doesn't really mean burnt. It means going up. So it's like the offering that ascends, or the ascension offering. Um, and that is kind of tied up with the idea of going up in smoke. So the idea was that the offering was placed on the altar, and it ascended in smoke up to Yahweh, because it was imagined that
Mhm.
God was up there in the heavens and humans were down there on the earth. So the gift was being given upwards. So I try and now use the word given upwards rather than giving up, because giving up to us today implies that you're
Right.
going without something that you want. But giving up is right, but giving upwards is kind of a
Right.
better idea. And it fits really well with the burnt offering, which is all about going up. So the going up offering, um, is a gift that ascends in smoke up to God. And it's received, or God talks about it as a pleasing aroma.
Mhm.
Um, and I think that visually, would have reminded, the people seeing it, that what they had presented on God's altar was being received by God as a pleasing aroma, and they would have smelt it and they would have seen it. Um, they didn't eat it because the burnt offering was entirely given to God. Um, but yeah, it would have been, a pretty sensory teaching
Mhm.
lesson for them. But yeah, the cake. Um, so if you think that, God created everything, including the animals, and he says over and over again, um, everything that you have is from me. So giving God the gift of an offering, is something that he gave you first. So, yeah, in the book, I talk about the idea of giving my son cake, um, and then their reaction is that he would want to give it back to me. So if you've ever sat like a 3-year-old in a chair and given them cake, and they want to shove it into your face, that's like you gave them the cake, but their reaction is that they just want to give it back to you because they're so happy about the cake and they want to share that experience with you. And I think that's exactly what a burnt offering is. Um, God gave them good things and blessed them,
Mhm.
and out of the blessing that God has given them, it's a desire to give back of the good that God's given you and to share it back with Him.
So it's more like the idea of reciprocal gift giving. So like
Mm,
God gives us gifts, and then we give gifts back to God, and then God gives us. So it's a back and forth exchange and love of gifts that come out of that desire to of love to bless.
yeah,
That goes
and it
two
wasn't
directions.
like, yeah, and it wasn't like you had to give something big. Like if you were
Mhm.
poor and you had nothing, you could bring a handful of flour, and that was
Mhm.
fine. Even back in, Genesis, Cain and Abel bring from what they had, and we don't know if God told them to or not, or that whether they just did it because they loved God and they wanted to bring something. Well, Abel at least. um, but it just seems, I like to think that it was just an expression of, hey, I love this God and I want to bring the best of what He's given me and show my appreciation. Yeah.
Yeah, that always really fascinates me, because I was looking at, for the episode that I did yesterday, just kind of biblically the whole idea of offerings, starting in Genesis 4 with Cain and Abel is the first time we see one, and it's you're just like, it just kind of drops out of nowhere. Where did this come from? And this whole idea, but and we look at the book of Hebrews, and it kind of gives us a little bit of a hint that's talking about the heart of the offerer and not so much about the offering itself. um, that I think there's a lot. I mean, we don't want to get sidetracked on that either, because that would be where I love to go. But we're going to try to stick on topic here as much as we can. So, and I really liked your chapter about the third portion talking about is Yahweh hungry for a food offering. Like, what is going on with the offering of food? Because it's not like God doesn't have a physical presence that can sit down and eat this physical food. So talk us through like what's happening with that.
Yeah, good question. And so there's two ways you could answer it. One way is that the existing culture that Israel lived in were giving offerings to all of the numerous gods that they imagined were around. And God says, all right, this is what you're doing anyway. Let me show you, if you want to continue doing that practice of giving food gifts to the gods, this is how I want you to do it. This is how you're going to give food gifts to me. That's one option. Or the other option is that from the very beginning, God commanded it, or God showed his people, like maybe showed Abel and Cain what was appropriate, and they did it, and it was passed down through the generations. Like, I don't know which one is correct. Maybe it's both. I don't know. Either way, it is an expression of sharing food with a deity, with a god. So the burnt offering, God gets all of it, but pretty much every other offering, the priests eat some, and with the peace offering, the person who brings the offering takes it home and shares it as a meal with the community, with their family and the village. So it's about sharing a meal with God, which is pretty amazing, I think. And that's why it's described as a pleasing aroma, because when you think about the things that are placed on the altar, like they're all food. The flour is made into cakes and mixed with oil and seasoned with salt. The grain offering is like, fine flour, oil, salt. And then all of the animal offerings are cooked and divided into pieces, talked about as a pleasing aroma. But they're all things that are food and livestock that was kept for food. So you don't see them putting gold and silver on the altar, or animals that weren't going to be eaten. Like they weren't getting like a lion, like a strong animal,
Right.
and putting that on the altar. Which, sometimes the way people talk about sacrifice, you would think that you just get the biggest, strongest, hardest to catch, biggest, scariest animal and put that on the altar. But no, they're sharing a food gift with God.
Which brings up the question of, because there was specific types of animals that you could offer, because there's a whole bunch of unclean things, and this is in the tabernacle, this is in the temple. So you're not going to bring unclean things into those sacred spaces, and you're definitely not going to offer unclean things to God. That would, the prophetic books show us what happens when that kind of stuff goes on. Or if, for those of people who get really curious and read Maccabees, and they talk about the desecration of the temple by offering pork carcasses on the altars. And like there's definitely some parameters of what can be offered. And so you get into the whole realm of clean and unclean. But that too, I wonder, Phil, about if that's the sharing of the meal, that's something that they can both participate in, because both of them have a shared palette or menu available, I guess, for lack of a better way to say that. Like,
Yep. Yeah. So in that ancient culture, in the ancient Near East, sharing a meal with someone meant that you were not equals, but meant that you were connected and at peace, So you wouldn't share a meal with someone and then go out and start a war with them. Like if you share a meal with someone, it means that you're at peace. And it means that you're something has been shared between you that has connected you. So sharing a meal. So if two heads of two different nations or two heads of two different tribes, they would actually actively avoid sharing a meal with someone, because then that would mean that they are now not allowed to attack that other tribe. So yeah, the fact that God is inviting his people to share a meal with him means that that they're at peace, that if something happens to them, it's almost an obligation to protect them. So if two different tribe members had shared a meal together and the other one gets attacked, then they would kind of be obligated to protect, because that's what a meal signified. So yeah, sharing a meal with God is, once you start realizing those things, it becomes really special.
Yeah, it
Yeah.
does.
Yeah.
And that really also speaks to I think where some atonement views go wrong, because if you're communing in a meal with God and that means you're brought under God's protection, that gets problematic if you're thinking that those offerings are inflicting of some sort of, however those go wrong. I don't want to get into that too much, but it makes some problematic atonement theory issues for certain views if you're under God's protection in that.
Yeah. And that's part of the reason why Leviticus was appealing, because a lot of those atonement issues, if you like, they can get really nasty and really passionate. And if you just have that discussion about atonement from Romans, for example, I think you're missing. I'll say it this way: that's why Leviticus was appealing, because it kind of sidesteps that messy Romans atonement nasty debate. Often it gets nasty and people get really angry. But understanding sacrifice in Leviticus and just ancient culture in general, just really helped to kind of reframe how you think about Jesus as a sacrifice. And it highlights more that I think you alluded to it before about the unblemished. The animal had to be unblemished, and if it was blemished or unclean, it would defile the altar, so you couldn't give it to God. And so Jesus is an unblemished, pure offering, joyfully given, not because it was required, but because and it highlights or focuses more on the unblemished character, the perfect character of Jesus that becomes acceptable. So his perfect life is the thing that was required in an animal, that its unblemished character. Well, you can't check the character of an animal, but you can check its body. And I think that's why that law is there. It's to show that what God desires at his table or in his presence is unblemished character. And while we can't do that, because we're sinful and we always fail, and we have like blemished characters, we can show what we want to do and what we would like to do by selecting the best animal that is unblemished and saying, here, I'll present this to you as a sign of what my desire is to give you, even though I can't. I'm trying my best. But Jesus could do it. So he could offer himself as an unblemished, perfect character. And that's why I think he was acceptable to God.
And this was also really interesting in your book too, and I've heard you talk about it a little bit before. If you could kind of talk about it some more, about as a butcher, being careful to learn how to break down meat, and if the meat is mistreated, that it gets it gets bruised, it gets damaged, and then it affects the way it tastes and all that. So kind of talk about that and how that is part of why this unbruised perfect sacrifice is important, because we don't want to send God yucky tasting meat. I mean,
Yeah. Yeah. So another thing about being a butcher is you, it's quite obvious if an animal has been bruised, because as you're cutting up steaks, you see it and it looks disgusting. And if you were to cook it, it would feel gross in your mouth. So we normally discard any bruised meat. It gets thrown into minced meat, or ground beef, you would call it if you're not in Australia. And so if you've read the Bible, you would know that a bone couldn't be broken. So it talks about the Passover lamb couldn't have a broken bone. Jesus, his legs weren't broken to fulfill that prophecy. It says that not one of his bones will be broken. They couldn't have any blemishes or warts, broken bones, and there's a whole thing we could talk about with that. But just from a butcher's point of view, it makes sense. Like, you don't want to eat meat that has a bruise. You don't want to serve something that is broken, like has a broken bone. So that, yeah, that bit makes sense. Even that the animal, if it's stressed before it's killed, it releases a hormone into the muscles, and it changes color. It gets like a real dark kind of purpley color because of the hormone that's been released. But you can tell just by looking at that meat that the animal was stressed, and it's not a good thing. Like, again, it has a weird mouthfeel and it kind of tastes weird, and it doesn't look nice in the cabinet. So if people want to suggest that a sacrifice is about torturing an animal, or that an animal suffers, yeah, I would say that is very wrong. That it's the opposite. That everything about the process is designed to keep the animal as unblemished as possible. Even today, it's not in the Bible, but today, if you see a Jewish kosher kill, I write about this in the book as well. But when I was an apprentice, we visited an abattoir, and it would just so happen that it was Jewish kosher kill day. And so the guy that does the slaughtering uses a knife, and between each time he would run his fingernail along the blade of the knife, which kind of makes you shiver. But he was just testing the blade for any little nicks or anything on it, because the blade had to be perfect. The blade had to be without defect, because you couldn't kill an animal with an imperfect blade. And I think that's come from that whole idea of that the animal must be imperfect and unblemished, and couldn't be damaged in any way.
That's interesting. So with all of that perspective, and you talked about it in the book, and it was really interesting. So, and I know this is kind of outside of your wheelhouse here, but how does that nuance for you when you read things like Micah and the condemnation of Israel, bringing all of those broken and diseased and damaged animals for sacrifice? Like,
So I think that speaks to the heart of the offerer. If they, like, what does it say that if you acknowledge that what you're bringing is food, but you're just going to bring the damaged, blemished, sick animals and present that to God, then what does that say about what you think of God? I think, is it in Micah that where it says, would you bring this to your ruler, and what would he think of you? Would he be pleased if you brought him, maimed and broken animals? Like, no, he would he would tell you to go away. Don't share this kind of food with me. So yeah, in that way, I think it reflects the heart of the person bringing the gift, that they would want to bring the best, and if they didn't want to bring the best, then he's not interested. he doesn't want to be connected to that kind of person.
Right. I'm just kind of going through down on my notes, looking through the chapter headings here, because there's this. This is such a such a brilliant book. I loved it so much. But if you could talk about the chapter, like I really was found chapter 7 to talk about the why the fat chapter. You were talking about why fat is off the table, and the significance of what's going on there. So could you just kind of talk us through that whole process, because this was for me another fun chapter I learned a lot from in going through the book.
Just quickly from the chat, yes, the meat is tougher
Okay.
if the animal's been stressed.
Okay.
Yep, if the animal's stressed, then yep, the meat is tougher. So there are actually places, especially in Japan, where they will massage a cow to make the meat tender. Yeah, you pay a lot for it, but you can buy massaged meat. It's crazy.
Send your meat to the spa first and
Yep.
make it good.
Yep.
That's
Yep.
funny.
What was the question about fat?
The fat, yes.
Yes. Yep. So in an ancient mind, or they weren't concerned with body weight like we are today, because they were more active probably than we are today. They didn't spend their day in front of a computer or on a couch. So, and they didn't eat meat regularly is something that's really important. They didn't eat meat like we do today. If you live in a kind of affluent country, meat was rare. And so when they did eat meat, if you can imagine that you'd never eaten fat on meat, like every time you had it, it would be like the most amazing thing to put in your mouth. So the fatty portions were considered the best bits. So even in Homer's Iliad, they try and trick the god by putting fat over the bones of the meat, or the bones, sorry. And then he gets angry because he's realized he's been tricked. But the fat was considered the bit that you would give to the god. And so God, it says in the Bible that God gets all the fat. So the Israelites weren't allowed to eat the fat. And I think that means, so when you look inside, here's my butcher's take on it. When you look inside a lamb and it's sitting on the bench, you look inside the rib cage, you have this big, like a big layer of fat it's hard by the time it's in our cool room. But that is a protective coating that sits around all the important bits in an animal. So there's a big protective layer of fat that sits around the kidneys and the liver. And I think that's what the Bible's talking about when it says that God gets the fat and the kidneys and the liver. It's all of this important bit that sits in the center of the animal that's taken out and given to God. And I don't know that you would eat that bit. Today we make soap from it and other things like that. But the principle is there that the fatty portions. So when Abel brought the fatty portions, like maybe he was just bringing like the best cuts of meat. And in the Bible, it talks about like the fat of the land. So fat there is just a metaphor for the best bit of the land, or the fat of wheat just means like the best crop, the best part of the wheat. Yeah. So that, again, that helps understand like what you were giving God. You were giving God the best bits of the offering of the animal.
Right. I found that really interesting because like I'm one of those that if we get Like the very rare times that we'll go out and do like a steak dinner or something, and or at home, and we'll grill it. My dog loves it because I'm like, oh, there's fat on this, and I usually cut it off, and my dog loves it because I give it to my dog, and I don't eat that because that to me is like ew. I don't like, it's a textural thing mostly for me, but I just to think about, but also at the same time thinking about like what you just said and talking about the how it works internal to protect the important internal organs. We're not thinking that when the priests are breaking down the animal that they're going head, nose to tail and scraping every little piece of fat off of this animal to put on the altar, because I think that also is going maybe a little too far with that
Yep.
imagery there.
Yeah, I think so. We don't know for sure, but yeah, I
Mhm.
suspect that it's talking about that obvious kind of layer of fat in the center of the animal. Yep.
Because that would take a
Yeah.
long time to scrape
To
every
get
little
rid of, yes. Yep, you're right.
piece of fat off of an animal would
Yep.
take all like for a really long
Yep.
time. Then you
And yeah, something I didn't put in the book, I probably should have. As a butcher, we learnt that even the most lean meat that you can get is still 2% fat. So if it's visually lean and you can't see any speck of fat in it, even if you make ground beef or minced meat, that you can't ever call it 100% lean because it will still be minimum 2% fat. So it's not like a textbook. No fat is to be eaten because you eat the most lean piece of meat and you're still getting 2% fat.
Right. So I think it's just like you said, I think that's just representational of that. But that makes sense because if it's protecting those seats of emotion and the best parts of the animal, that you would take all of that together because it kind of all works. It all works together. So yeah, I really thought that chapter really made me think a lot about just because we do, a lot of people don't like fatty meat now, but that and your experience, you're telling the story about like your trip to Ethiopia, and like I've been to some places like Haiti and some other countries like that where only rich people have meat at every meal and they rarely eat meat, and so we're in our context, a lot of us are, people get cranky if they don't have meat at every meal. So breakfast, lunch, and dinner, you're having something with meat. But if meat is expensive, and like the laws in Torah about not like compensating somebody if you cause the death of their ox, because you're taking somebody's livelihood, so you're not going to compromise your own livelihood by eating your own oxen or your own animals that you need to survive. Like that's the preservation of life that really, again, and entire speaks to the preciousness of that participation in that meal with God, because that's a costly thing. But and if you could talk about this, you had some really good parts in your book about this too, about how it was, even though these especially the animal sacrifices were something very precious and valuable, the system was built accommodation so that everyone could come. So even if you, like you said, you only could bring a handful of flour, there were still ways to get access. But if you so talk about that a little bit, about it wasn't setting up an exclusion system for the rich, or people couldn't buy favor by the expensiveness of the offering, so everyone could participate.
Yeah, yep, yeah, and that's important to realize, that God wants communion with Him, or the bringing near of an offering to Him, to be available to everyone, no matter if you're rich or poor. So there is kind of a whole hierarchy, like whatever it
Right.
is, of something which people have put into spreadsheets to show that, like, say, the high priest would have to bring something bigger and more select than just a normal priest, and then a normal priest would have to bring something better than a normal Israelite. And then if you couldn't afford anything, you could just bring a handful of flour, or you could bring two birds. And if you couldn't afford 2 birds, then you could just bring flour. But I think that's setting up the idea that no one is excluded. Everyone is expected to bring near a gift. But if it was something like a purification offering, a sin offering, that you couldn't be cleansed, or you couldn't draw near to God only if you had money. Like that wasn't the way it was set up. I think it's still there, like drawing near to God, you need to bring something to share, or it's an invitation to bring a food gift and share. But yeah, it didn't require you to have heaps of money. So for if a woman say needed to be cleansed because she'd just given birth, or was unclean because she'd just had a period or something, she could bring a handful of flour, and that was fine. But the high priest, he might bring a bull. If something had happened and he's presenting an offering, it might be a bull for him, or a goat or a lamb.
All right. I want to jump ahead a little bit to the laying on of hands, because this was another really good chapter that gave me some things to think about, because we think about, well, I'll just let you talk about that. I don't want to give too much of it away, because this was another one of those chapters that I was like, I kind of thought I was understanding what was going on there, but you gave me some really interesting things to think about in some of those nuances. So kind of talk us through what you learned about laying on of hands of writing this chapter.
Yeah. So I don't know if it's the same elsewhere, but in my tradition, it's kind of just accepted that the laying on of hands transferred sin to the animal. Like people don't even question it in my little corner of the world in Sydney. It's just accepted that that's what the laying on of hands meant. And when all you have to do is read Leviticus, and you quickly discover that can't be the case, for a lot of the reasons that we've already talked about. Like it would then be unblemished. Sorry, that would then be blemished. So if you couldn't give something to God that was bruised or had a broken bone, surely you couldn't give God a sin-covered animal. Like that wouldn't be something that he wanted. And then you think, well, maybe it's just the sin is just transferred to the head. But then you read that the head is specifically placed on the altar. It doesn't tell you about the legs or the breast or anything, but it specifically says the head is placed on the altar. So you're like, okay, well, God probably wouldn't think that a sin-covered head is a pleasing aroma. Then you think, well, maybe it's in there, but it gets burnt up and then it's kind of gone. But then you notice that the priests eat some of the meat, so they wouldn't be eating sin-contaminated meat, because that would just be weird. And that kind of all, if you're just reading Leviticus through, that should just jump out at you intuitively. Mm-hmm. But then when you read about the Day of Atonement, and there is a goat that has sins placed on its head, and you think, well, that must be what's happening for everything else. But then after that man leads that goat outside the camp, he can't come back into the camp because he's unclean. Right. So he can't come back in until he's washed himself and his clothes. So even his clothes have become contaminated. And only then, I think he has to wait till evening. So he has to wash himself and his clothes, and then he has to wait till evening, and then he can come back in, because then he's cleansed. So that is what a sin-covered animal looks like and what it does to you. And that animal is led in the opposite direction from the altar. So where every other offering is placed on the altar, this goat that is definitely has sin placed on its head is led away from Yahweh, away from the altar, and away from the camp, and it's let go outside the camp. So,
And I wonder, and I talk about this, and I think, you and I would have probably at a different point, a really interesting discussion about this specifically. I don't want to spend too much time here, but like when I talk about Day of Atonement with people, and we're talking about these two goats, I talk about this more as, instead of like the transferring of, like infecting the animal with sin, and we think about it more like imagery of what you would think about as like a pack mule, like it's putting that weight on that animal like a pack mule so that it can carry it back out into the wilderness, back out to Azazel, back out to the source of that, where sin came from. That weight of that responsibility goes back where it belongs.
yeah. So yes. So that language of bearing iniquity, carrying sin, is how that second goat is described. Yeah, I mean, there's a lot we could talk about, because priests also
Right.
priests also bear iniquity. So does the servant figure in Isaiah, bears iniquity. So whatever it means, I think it involves the idea of carrying that burden. But yeah, what the priests do with it is, we kind of are wondering what the priests might do, because it says a couple of times in the Bible that the priests bear iniquity. But yeah, we know definitely what the goat did with it. So it took it outside the camp, and removed it from the Israelites to cleanse them and to leave them pure. It's basically the idea of removing sin. So when John the Baptist says, "Look, behold the Lamb of God who takes away the sin of the world," I think that's the idea, is like taking away sin, removing anything that makes you unclean or impure, and removing it from you and leaving you clean and pure and forgiven.
Right. I just, we could go on about that for forever, which we can jump to your your last chapter there. Like, can atonement really remove sin? Because this is a big thing a lot of people like to argue about, especially in the Old Testament Levitical system. Like, what is going on? Does atonement, because there's atoning sacrifices and non-atoning offerings, like, what's happening there? You get the Day of Atonement making all kinds of confusion with people who, because I think we come at it from our theological perspective and read it through that, instead of letting the story talk for itself. So just kind of walk us through that last chapter you have there about, can atonement really remove sin? Like, what's happening in that?
Yeah. So I start that chapter, and this is one of my favorite parts of the book, because I didn't write it, but it came from an article where they list all the different scapegoat rituals from other nations around Israel, which is like, it's totally fascinating. Because I thought, until I read that, I thought that it was just a Bible thing, that it was just something that only the Israelites do. But there's Babylonian rituals, and the other nations are escaping me. But so one of them has a goat that they send away to cleanse. So the king and queen would get married in a mausoleum, which is weird to get married in a death place.
Right.
But before they could get married there, they had to remove any evil spirits that might be hanging around. And so they would put that evil onto a goat and send the goat away and clean out the mausoleum before they could have a wedding in there.
That was ancient Syria. Yeah.
Syria, was it? Yeah.
Yep.
And then there's other ones where they would, if someone was sick, they would spit into a frog's mouth, and then they would send the frog back into the into the marshes or wherever the frog came from, and they would say this thing. They would recite a thing that says, "Take this illness with you, and take it back to the marshes or the swamp." There's all these things, like there's, I don't know, 5 or 6 of them with a similar idea, and the thing they have in common is that none of the animals die, and in all cases there's something unwanted, unclean, or an illness or a sickness or an evil spirit is transferred somehow to the animal and then sent away, so it's removed. So once you realize that, you realize that Israel was just taking an existing practice that several of their neighboring nations already did, and just implementing that, which is super fascinating, I think. But yeah, atonement, I've come to realize that atonement has to be understood within the context of that day of atonement, because 2 specific things are happening. So our English word atonement was invented by Tyndale, because he didn't know what to do with that word, kapor. I think originally he made it from the Greek word, but then he just used it for the Hebrew word as well, which might have been a bad move. I'm not sure, but he thought it had something to do with becoming at one. So he invented the word he literally invented the word at one meant, because he thought it had the idea of God and humans becoming at one, which is fine until you actually read Leviticus, and atonement's made for a tent and an altar and a house. And I don't know anyone
and
that
forks and
I don't know anyone that wants to become at one with an altar. Like that's weird. So the word is closer to wiping. And I'll talk about this in the book as well, that Noah wipes on tar onto the boat. So that's a wiping on. But when it's used in a sacrificial or sense, it's a wiping away. So wiping off. So what's happening on Day of Atonement is that the blood of one of the goats is used to wipe away any impurity or sin from the altar and from the mercy seat right inside holy space, the most holy place. So that's one act of atonement. And then the other act is that all of the impurity is placed on the head of the second goat, and it's removed. So that's another act of wiping away you've got, and then you've got the removal. So it's the whole idea of removing impurity, wiping away sin and impurity, and then the end result is that the space and the people are cleansed. So it's basically what atonement means. It's the cleansing, maybe not what it means, but the end result of atonement is that the thing or the person is cleansed, ritually cleansed.
And that idea of covering takes me back to the conversation that you and I had about the blood on the door through the Passover ritual and Passover, and what that means, and that covering of protection and God standing guard. And it just, there's so many aspects to that word of covering that. But yeah, it's basically an annual spring cleaning for Israel to cleanse the temple, the tabernacle, cleanse that space, to reestablish God's presence again for another year. And just spring cleaning is a really good analogy, sort of, for that. I mean, there's not a perfect analogy for it, but that's about as good as we get about that. So, all right. So, Phil, we're going to kind of work on wrapping up here, because it's been a little over an hour. And so talk to me about, in the end here, what were your couple biggest takeaways from this process of writing this book and everything that you've learned, and now as you're put it out there, and the response has been really, really amazing, and it's going pretty popular on Amazon, and it's been I think pretty high up in the given Wes a Will Hess a run for his money for his atonement book that he wrote, and just the response has been really good. So kind of just talk to me about that, what you've learned from writing the book and from the response that you've gotten from people.
Yeah, well, yeah, thank you for saying that. I one thing, and it's revealed to me that I really, really like writing, so that's fun. But yeah, the response, like I've been really, really honored and at times like quite emotional from the response that, like, a couple of people have said that it has, the last chapter especially, has brought them to tears, which like I'm still trying to realize what that means. But for me personally, I think there's two things that I didn't at all expect that would change me. One of them I've kind of already said, that the sensory aspect of ritual. So now I really long, like I've become one of those people that that likes liturgy, which and I didn't I was anti liturgy. Like I was like, you should have like let the Spirit lead in church, and we should do more songs and kind of less reciting things, because reciting creeds and prayers is boring and will turn people away from church. And I don't, like, that might be true, but I really now have this kind of longing, yearning for ritual that has meaning, I think. Not ritual that doesn't have meaning, not just doing things for the sake of it, but I've discovered that, especially in the Orthodox and Catholic traditions and the Anglican traditions, when they do it right, everything is so meaningful. Like even the windows mean something. So if you can't read, or if you got ADHD and you can't concentrate on a sermon for 20 minutes and you get distracted by a window, like that means something. And that's great. The incense means something, like it. And if you know what it means, you can go into this beautiful space like a cathedral that is designed to make you feel awe and make you be kind of smothered in beauty. And even if you get distracted, you're distracted by things that are pointing you to God, but in a way that is not a cognitive left brain kind of way. Like if you see the smoke ascending and you're like, okay, that's our prayers ascending up to God and he's receiving our prayers. Or even the direction that the priest faces means something, or the different colors that the priest wears. If you know what it, it all reminds you of something. And it's something that I don't experience in my tradition, but it's something that I long for. So that was surprising. The other thing has been communion, which again, in my tradition, it's not something that we do as regularly as I would like. But having the idea of sharing a meal with God, and everything that means. So it means that God is for you, and it means that you have a special connection and that you are participating with and united with God. And one thing we didn't talk about is blood, and that the blood is the life of the animal, and the lifeblood of the creature was used to purify space. So it's like bringing life into a space that's been affected by impurity or death. And then when we are offered Jesus' blood to consume, it's like we are being offered his life. So God is sharing his life with us, and we get to consume that, and it fills our insides. And so we can imagine that, or I imagine that I'm being purified from the inside out, and my whole being. I'm getting a little bit emotional now talking about it, but it's so beautiful that it's not and again, in our church, we like stress like it's merely symbolic. Like maybe it is symbolic, but it can touch you, and if you understand what it means to participate in Jesus' body and to be united with him in his flesh and his life and his death and resurrection, and that he shares his life-giving blood with us, then I think that's a super special thing. I wish I could do more.
It's it's like there's something to this whole participatory aspect of rhythm, and the whole Old Testament is set up as a liturgy. Hebrews thinks in liturgy. Creation establishes liturgy. That's the whole ancient Near East mind, the whole ancient Near East culture, the way they lived was a liturgy. That's really basically how they experienced their world, was liturgical. So
And they probably couldn't read.
yeah.
So they were learning things as they ate it and experienced it. And and the repetition would have become ingrained in their very being, like their psyche, just from seeing it done every day.
When I was in prophets class, we were talking about when we were going through the book of Jeremiah, and how like Baruch sat there and wrote down everything for Isaiah, and they took the scroll to the king, and the king reads it and chops it off and chucks it in the fire, and he was talking about that scroll that Isaiah wrote, that Baruch was dictated to Baruch, that the process of the supplies, the ink, the skins, or whatever, the putting that scroll together, that would have cost multiple thousands of dollars to produce one scroll. And so the fact that we're dealing with an agrarian or semi-migratory civilization, and this is a period in time that I think we forget now, valued the oral word over the written word. And so all of these things being liturgical and participatory was built that way because that's the way they functioned. And every sensory thing were bookmarks and hashtags to the oral story that reminded them of participating in these daily rituals with God. And so it was very much set up sensory on purpose, because they valued oral over the written word, because nobody could afford it. And you're wandering around with your sheep in the middle of nowhere. You don't have lamps or flashlights or your phone app that you can read your Torah scroll from when you're out in the middle of nowhere with guarding your sheep from the kind of thing. So it was built that way. It was built for memory and oral and participatory. And so that it just, I could go on about that. That's part of my thesis that's coming up too. So I don't want to tip my hand too much on that. But a couple of questions really quick before I let you go here that I wanted to pull up. So Deborah's been asking about Adam and Eve and the offering, or when in Genesis 3, and God gives them the animal is killed, and God gives them so I want to talk about that just a little bit, because that's one of the first places we see covering there, and the words that used there is covering. And so they cover themselves with leaves, but you see when God comes and cares for them after the fall, that's the first thing God does, is God cares for them, and he gives them the animal skin covering. And so we don't exactly know, was it that the leaves weren't good enough? But it is the covering of that shame in that loving care. God wants them to be protected, provided for, and nurtured. That's the first thing he does before he has to send them out of the garden. So there is that aspect too of covering that I think starts that imagery of the covering atonement that goes way back to Genesis 3.
Yeah, so I didn't write about this in the book, but I have written about it. So first thing I would say is that a lot of people want to say that that was the first sacrifice because an animal died. And I think that misses the point of sacrifice. If your definition of sacrifice is that something died, you've misunderstood sacrifice. The sacrifice is predominantly a gift given to a god, and it's food. So you'd have to ask first, what god was that gift given to, and how was it eaten? And neither of those things have answers, because God didn't kill an animal for himself, and no one ate it. So, however, it is a pattern that comes up. So actually, I see a parallel in the Cain story. So where Adam and Eve fail, and then they're exiled from the garden. Before that happens, they're covered with skins. When Cain fails, he's exiled, and he is offered a mark of protection from God. So I think that helps us understand that the skin coverings was a protection. And then when you go back and read all of the early writings on the garments of skin, all of them talk about protection. There's some really weird ones in there, but they're all positive. They're all about God is protecting them. And the idea that it was a sacrifice because something died only comes up, like I couldn't find anything written on it earlier than the Matthew Henry commentary, which I think is the 1700s. Like that's the first time I found it. So at some point, let's say the 1700s, someone decided that a sacrifice is because something died, and then they're like, oh, well, look, something died, that must be a sacrifice. But no one before that thought that was a sacrifice.
Right.
But,
well, even if it was in some aspect a sacrifice, the fact that God is sacrificing to humans is extremely problematic. So, you know, that doesn't work in and of itself right there.
Yeah, but protection and covering, definitely.
Yeah, because there's some shame things that are going on there, a lot of shame language. This was actually the first time we see the word shame in the Bible, is in Genesis 3 in that story. So there's a lot of really interesting things. And then Jose wants to know when your audio book is coming out.
Yes, that is, top of my list. I have a to-do list. I'm actually on leave at the moment from work, and I've been working my way through my to-do list. I've replaced a washer in my laundry. I've replaced my toilet because it was leaking. But next on my list is to record an audiobook. So yes, I hope to do that, get a soundproof room, and sit in there for a couple of hours and speak. So yeah, you'll be getting me, hopefully you'll be getting me reading my book.
That's awesome. And Carrie left a couple questions, so I want to they're real quick ones, so we won't take long. But Carrie wanted to know, can you please share your favorite recipe?
Yep. Beef cheeks probably is my favorite recipe. Slow cooked beef cheeks with vanilla bean and orange peel. It's cooked for about 6 hours in the oven. And if you haven't heard of beef cheeks, find it. Look it up. You might only be able to find it frozen because they're not popular. But if you get a good butcher and you can get beef cheeks, it'll change your world.
Yeah. Growing up with a dairy research scientist, we ate interesting parts of cows. So I'm familiar with that. All right. And then her other question is, did they know about jerky in the ancient Near East?
Do you know, that's actually a great question, because they would have traveled and they didn't have fridges. So there are laws about not keeping meat longer than 2 or 3 days. And there's a reason for that, I think, which I talk about in the book. But yeah, someone else asked me, what about jerky? Like, that's keeping it longer than 2 or 3 days. Like, would that have been okay? And did they transport meat in the wilderness if they dried it out and made jerky? Like, I don't know. I would have. I would have definitely made some spiced meat and dried it out and put it in in the little bag on my donkey. But I don't know. Yeah.
I don't know. I think that the whole manna and quail thing might have a little bit to say about that.
They hadn't invented the drying out technology yet.
Maybe, or I mean, I don't know. I don't know. Now, doggone you, Carrie. Now I'm going to have to go back and look because I'm curious. All right. So thank you so much, Phil. I really appreciate you taking some time. This has been a lot of fun. I always have a lot of fun when you and I get a chance to talk and chat. And this is a great book. All of the stuff is in the description down below. There's a link to the book on Amazon. If you don't have it, I highly recommend it. I have given away several copies to people, so I have bought multiple copies of Phil's book as well to give away. So that's it. Yep. Hold that up. Show that it's not real long, and it's a fun read. It's engaging. There's a lot of really fun examples, and yes, those who did those. Your wife did those, right?
Yeah, my wife did all the illustrations. That was part of the thing. So when I realized how sensory Leviticus made me feel, I'm like, well, I can't just do like a cognitive book with words only. I have to have pictures. So it does.
Yep. Yeah, she did a great job too. Those are really well done. So what a good job. Congratulations to your wife too for those great illustrations. So all right, Phil, where can people find you, and what do you have coming up, and what is the other Phil up to in the next series of videos that you have? Yeah, see there, he's hiding over there. What are you and Phil up to in the next few episodes on your channel?
So you can find me at Leviticus is Fun on YouTube. I try and release videos weekly. They're short. I try to make them fun. I don't know if they're funny, but I have fun making them at least. Yeah, I'm up to chapter 8, so I've been walking through all of Leviticus from chapter 1, currently in chapter 8, which I love. I think that might be my favorite chapter. I'm about to do a video on the putting the blood on Aaron and his son's earlobes, thumbs, and big toes, which is fascinating. I'm still learning. I learned a lot researching this video. That'll be coming out soon. Yeah, so I'm there. Leviticus is Fun on YouTube. I have a website, but it's just my blog, basically, Ubiquitous Leviticus. But yeah, if you're going to go anywhere, find me on YouTube. Yeah, I'm pretty active on there. And there's, yeah, that's this little joke. There's 2 of me.
Phil and Phil. Yeah, so that was fun, because when I contacted Phil about this, and I was like, hey, have your people contact my people and we can set this up, and he messaged back, Phil wants to talk to you about doing a book interview with Phil. So it's all in good fun. We have a good time. And then we've also got next month, we're still, I think, in negotiation with everybody to set the date exactly, because I think one of them is a maybe, and we can't go forward without Courtney. So we have to get that straightened out. But we've got some more episodes coming out on why Leviticus matters, and Phil is definitely one of the Levitic geeks that is a part of those videos. And the next one is going to be, I think, one of your favorites on the priesthood, because we're going to kick into the priesthood and the role of the priesthood and what it does and all of that fun stuff. And then we've got 4 or 5 or 6 or 7 of them, more of those, depending on how many I can con everybody into. Sorry. Because they're just a lot of fun, and there's so much in Leviticus. You could just go on about Leviticus forever. And the last one is going to be a video about why Ezekiel is better than Leviticus, because it talks all about why Leviticus is important and shows why it's about the gospel. So we
should do Hebrews as well. We can't stop at Leviticus and not do Hebrews.
Ooh, wow, that's That's
The
a
sequel.
great idea. Like
Yeah.
why Leviticus matters, the sequel.
Yeah.
That would be awesome. Because yeah, okay,
Ezekiel can be
Hebrews.
the interlude, and Hebrews is the sequel.
I actually had somebody contact me that wants me to come do a couple of collabs with them on Ezekiel because they saw the back and forth in some of the videos of you and Spencer and I about which is
That's great.
better, Leviticus or Ezekiel. And since we're on my channel, it's Ezekiel. So,
Yep.
all right. Thank you again, Phil. Thank you for everybody tuning in. Please go get Phil's book if you don't have it already. Get one or two more and give them away to people because it really is a great book and it explains a lot about Leviticus and atonement and offerings and how all those things work. Go check out his channel. Go like and subscribe over there if you haven't subscribed at Leviticus is Fun. It's one of the two channels that I watch pretty regularly and I recommend to people. Yours and Spencer's are the two channels that I always recommend to people. So please go over there to Leviticus. Leviticus is fun. They're fun videos and they're short, so they don't take 2 hours to watch them like some of these other ones. So they're really nice bite size, walk through Leviticus. They're really great. So, but thanks again, Phil. This was a lot of fun, and hopefully you enjoy the rest of your sabbatical from work and some peace and quiet while your family's gone. And we will see you back on here for the next episode of Why Leviticus Matters, the Priesthood.
Looking forward to that. Yeah.
All right, everybody. Every day around here, we really try to focus on journeying to dwell deeper with God in every way that we can, every single day. So go and be blessed.